What comes to mind when you hear the word therapy? For me personally, it means needing a little bit of extra help when I'm struggling with my emotions. However, for a lot of people my age, it means something much more negative. I believe that putting therapeutic and psychiatric services into the public school system will greatly improve students' mental state and overall well-being. I have been in therapy for about 3 years now. I've received both therapeutic and psychiatric services, and I had a lot of help from my high school guidance counselor when I was a senior. I believe that in putting these therapeutic and psychiatric services into the public schools, it will decrease the harmful stigma around mental health. It will improve everyone's mental health literacy as a whole. And most importantly, people who cannot get therapy and psychiatry outside of school will be able to have these resources at their disposal. To begin, I'd like to dive a little bit deeper into the stigma surrounding mental health. For me personally, and I know for a lot of other people, a lot of anxiety comes from the concept of asking for help. It's very anxiety inducing to open up to someone about how you might need a little bit of extra help managing what goes on in your head, because you open yourself up to comments, concerns, judgments, stereotypes, assumptions from them. I believe that Scott Bloom from Behavioral Health News puts this in a really concise manner, and in stating that sometimes seeking help can expose youth to the risk of discouraging, unsupportive reactions from others, especially surrounded by peers and family naysayers. Plain and simple. Another stigma that I feel is important to address is the stigma surrounding a high school guidance counselor program. Again, also speaking from personal experience, because of the authoritarian nature of administrative services in schools, it's a very common hole to get stuck in is thinking that anything that the administration offers is for kids who have done something wrong, or they're troublemakers, or they're not doing something right, which isn't the case. Another quote from Rima Segal of Education Week, she states this from the perspective of a possible student, saying, "Counseling is for those who create trouble or are poor performers academically. Therefore, it's not for me." Along with the stereotypes that come from schools and places of education, it's also important to mention students' social lives and social circles. It's very common for symptoms of anxiety and depression to be written off as lazy, unmotivated, and not disciplined, every phrase in the book. And when these assumptions are made, yes, they are common emotions that people have. However, consistently showing them and consistently showing these signs can be a gateway into a possible major depressive diagnosis or a generalized anxiety disorder diagnosis, both of which I have. Another factor is the home life and how students have been raised. Because what contributes to the stigma of mental health is definitely one's role models. If you have parents who are not very supportive of mental health and receiving therapy and psychiatry and medication for these, it can be very, very, very hard to get any kind of help. Even if it were through the school with the systems we have in place now, it's still very difficult. And another thing, it is ingrained in this kid's mind because this is how they've grown up. It will be very hard to change that wiring, and I believe that putting these services in schools will surround them in a place that says, hey, this is actually okay. This is a good thing to have. There is nothing wrong with needing a little bit of extra help with managing your emotions. And so, if a student is struggling and we do input these services, what will be the first step? I believe the first step would be just including a curriculum that has more information about mental health. Since the pandemic, there has been a massive uptick in need for therapeutic and psychiatric services. However, with this uptick, we have a lot of people who aren't very knowledgeable on the topic. According to the BMC Public Health, it says the primary outcome is the improvement in positive mental health literacy as measured by the Mental Health Promoting Knowledge Scale. It's pretty much just expand people's vocabulary and knowledge surrounding mental illnesses like anxiety, depression, OCD, ADD, all that stuff. Just having more information so that people aren't completely in the dark. Another point that kind of goes back to one of the previous points I made is the differentiating between what is normal as a teenager and what you should really go to see a professional about. Caroline Miller from the Child Mind Institute states that it can be hard to notice anxiety because teens are good at hiding their emotions. Symptoms vary from kid to kid, which basically means we are not the same. Not a single person in this world is the same. However, there are certain criteria that you must meet for a diagnosis, and the difference between just being a teenager and showing these different signs and needing a diagnosis and needing intervention is very, very small, but it's a very, very slippery slope that can get very, very dangerous very, very fast. The last point that I'd like to include is answering the question, why have therapy in schools? When I hear that question, personally, I think of it from an accessibility standpoint. I believe that if therapy were offered in schools, teachers, principals, vice principals, secretaries, anyone, they could come together and help students improve, help them find ways to heal and to manage their struggles. I'm not saying here, have some skills, and you're good. I'm just saying here's some resources, here are some things you can do, here are some things that you can keep in your back pocket for when you start feeling like this again, so that you aren't completely in the dark when you feel like this again. Piggybacking off of that point, schools are a place of learning, and what better place to discover yourself and discover what you need as a human to do it in a school. In this sense, I get not everyone wants to have a self-epiphany when they're on their way to fifth period, but I believe that having these services is going to give kids the tools for success for years and years and years to come. Having these skills, and if these kids have their skills in their back pocket, that they have an immediate action whenever they start to feel blue. It's not going to happen instantaneously. I know that. Believe me, I know that. But I believe that next time you hear about a board meeting about your kid's schools, maybe consider standing up for your kid or anyone else you may know is struggling and suggest therapy in schools. It might save someone's life, literally. It saved mine, I can tell you that with confidence.